All right, welcome. I'm blown away by the number of people here. I'm actually surprised you all managed to find the room. I came by last night, and I came into the Marriott, and I kept walking and walking and walking, and I think it is probably as far as you can go in the building. So thank you for making it here. This talk is the complete developer's guide to the SkyDrive API. This is a chalk talk, and so what that means is I'm going to spend some time up front just getting you guys kind of on the same page, and we'll get a basic app running. From there, we can kind of switch gears a bit, and either you can ask questions, or I'll just keep showing you some of the features and functionality of the API. My name is Steve Gordon. I'm a development lead in Windows Live. I've been there for a little over 6 years. My team is responsible for Live Connect, which I'll get into shortly. So this is the agenda. First things first, though, how many of you made it to Dare's talk earlier this morning? Okay, a few of you. So there's a little bit of content that'll be the same, but I'm going to go much deeper than Dare did. The first thing we're going to do is we're just going to get up to speed on what Live Connect is, why you should care, what the big ideas are, and what it provides. And then I'll get started and actually show you from the ground up a sample of leveraging the Live SDK, and we'll get to the point where we can make an API call against SkyDrive. And then from there, as I mentioned, we'll get into the various scenarios that are supported by the APIs. And so I'll give time between each of the scenarios I show to field questions. And so if you can, just hold them until I ask. And so what is Live Connect? So Live Connect is the Windows Live's developer offering. And it really makes it easy for your apps, your websites, and your mobile devices to integrate with Windows Live ID, SkyDrive, Hotmail, and Messenger. And so that's great. That's a great high-level thing. But what does it actually mean in terms of what you actually get? We have a number of services. The services are exposed via a variety of protocols that make sense. For authentication and authorization, we have an OAuth 2.0 draft 20 endpoint that you'll use for that. We have a JSON-based REST endpoint for getting and manipulating users' live data. And then we have an XMPP endpoint, which is really specialized for Messenger, real-time communications and presence scenarios. Layered on top of that, we have a number of libraries for your usage. These libraries really are, they're optional. You're free to go to the cloud if you want, but they're there to help you and get you started, and potentially are quite useful for the vast majority of your scenarios. We have a JavaScript library for the web. This lets you interact with the OAuth endpoint, get consent from users, and then also make API calls. We have an identical JavaScript endpoint for Windows Metro-style apps. And then separately, we have a .NET library that works both with Windows Metro-style apps. So if you're a C# or VB developer, you can use that. And it also works with Windows Phone as well. And so then, in addition to that, we have the Live SDK. This is, the Visual Studio installer experience to, help you get it started and leverage those frameworks. And so we also have, a GitHub repository with a bunch of code samples for iOS, Android, Windows desktop. So if you aren't targeting one of the platforms we have a library for, we've got code for you to really get you up and running. And so in order to get started, there's a couple things you need to do. And so the first one, though, given that you're interacting with a service and you're building an app, the service needs to know about you. So I'll show you how to provision your app for cloud services. It's really straightforward, and it should be kind of a no-brainer for you. From there, I'll show you how to download and install and use the Live SDK. Again, this should be super straightforward. And then lastly, I'll actually use the JavaScript API within a new app that I create, and we'll end up getting user consent, and we'll make some API calls. And then and so let me show you that. So first things first, I'm going to launch Visual Studio. From here, I'm going to create a new project. I'm going to create a blank JavaScript Metro style app. So imagine here if this was your existing app that you've been working on over the last few days. You've got it up and running, and you want to add the live functionality. Next thing you need to do, go to dev.windows.com. I assume you guys have been there already over the past week, poking around, looking at the docs, all of that stuff. To actually hook up this functionality, where you'll need to go is the Metro Style App section. And then from there, you'll want to navigate to the dashboard. The dashboard will be in the future where the Windows Store is. And so that will be where you go to upload your package, change names, your pricing, all of that kind of configuration. But until that's ready, there's a spot on here for you to actually provision your cloud app and be able to use it both for the Live Connect scenarios that I'm talking about here, as well as some of the Windows push notifications and live tile scenarios as well. So this is the same experience for both. And so if you go here, you'll of course need to sign in to Windows Live if you're not signed in already. And then from here, there's a bunch of detailed steps to kind of walk you through the scenarios. What ultimately you're doing is kind of working with your app's AppX manifest. And so there's some pictures and whatnot that I'll kind of gloss over here. But when you come back, you can kind of read it more carefully and see exactly what you need. There's really two fields that need to be input. One is kind of the user-friendly name, and then the other is a publisher. And so you get both of those from your package manifest, which I will do right now. So I go ahead and open this, and I want to go to the packaging tab. And from here, this is our app name, but I'm going to go ahead and rename it right now to Hello World. And I'm going to copy that and paste it in here. And then I'm going to go ahead and take the publisher, which identifies me, and then go ahead and enter that into the corresponding publisher field. And that's it. You just go ahead and click accept, and we go create an app in the background. You get a number of identifiers. Some of these are for the Windows push notification scenarios. The one we care about right now is just the package name, which is this identifier right here. So I'm going to go ahead and take that and add it back into the manifest that I was just editing. And go ahead and save that. And so from that point, our app's configured. The next step down at the bottom will point you either to learn more about what you need to do to use the notifications, or in our case, we're going to download the Live SDK. This is the download experience on dev.live.com. So if you go there and go to downloads, you'll be able to find this. I've already downloaded the SDK locally, so I'm going to go ahead and install it. So now that that's done, we're actually ready to go. So I'm going to go back to our app. And from here, you're going to need to add a reference. And as you can see, this is where you'll go to add future SDKs that get built for Metro style apps. I'm going to go ahead and add the Live SDK. And now it's there. And so you can see it as a reference. From here, a couple things you need to do, just for your own benefit. Unless you're a master of remembering the API surface area, it's really great to get IntelliSense. And so the best way to do that is just drag and drop the reference into your script files. And you can see at the top it's there. This is also handy as well when you actually need to go reference this file in your markup. And so I'm going to open up the default.html that gets loaded when the app runs. And I'm going to add a reference to that very script file. And so now that script file will get bundled up with the AppX package. And then from there, we're going to go ahead and take advantage of the APIs. And there's a couple things I'll show you. The first thing is to note is that Everything within the JavaScript library hangs off of a root WL object. This is how you'll get consent. This is how you'll instantiate sign-in controls. It's also how you'll make API calls. First things first, though, we're going to actually initialize it. And so what this does is kind of gets things set up, and it'll actually go off and figure out whether the user has granted consent to your app before and given permission to the things that you need. And so you do that, and then from there, I'm going to go ahead and add a sign-in control. And this is just basically a little UI widget that will help users sign into your app. This is a one-time only thing, so once a user goes through this flow once, they won't have to again. There's a few different parameters you need to specify. One is the name, which is sign in. You can go ahead and enter that. Another is element, and this is going to be the DOM element that you want to contain the button. So I'm gonna specify button connect, and so that's that. And so I need to go ahead and add a corresponding thing into my markup. And so we should, from here, be good to go. I'll try to run the app and see if it works. OK, and so as you can see, it's a blank app. But up in the upper left-hand corner, we've got our sign-in control. You'll note that the logo is a Windows logo, Windows Live logo as well, and also the term sign-in. So if a user goes ahead and clicks this, they're taken to a consent experience. This is a screen that kind of gives the user an idea of what's happening, what's being shared, and why they might do that. And so we can see here that it says, "Hello world needs your permission," and it's currently asking for the default scope. Scopes are the discrete chunks of permissions that we give out. And so it's up to you to figure out what functionality you need, what information you need on behalf of the user, and then proceed to configure those appropriately within your app. Since we're doing SkyDrive scenarios, I'm going to have to go in and modify this. So I'm going to close this and go back to Visual Studio. Now, the one thing you might note, you're saying, OK, hey, I'm building a SkyDrive app. I really want people to know that that's the purpose of clicking this button. So we actually support specifying a brand. And so I'm going to specify SkyDrive. You could specify Messenger or Hotmail if those kind of aligned with your scenarios. And then from there, I'm going to specify the list of scopes. We still want WL.signin, which is the basic sign-in scope, because we do want the user to be signed in whenever this app runs. But in addition, we do want SkyDrive access. So you can ask for WL.SkyDrive. What this will get you is full read access to the user's SkyDrive. You'll be able to look at the folder hierarchy, navigate around it, get all the content, all of those things. And so if your scenarios are read-oriented, definitely ask for this scope. This will be more comfortable to a user. If your app is about bringing photos in, rather than saying, hey, I need write access, and leaving the user confused and unsure about what your intentions are, it's best to really ask for precisely what you need. Since we'll end up needing write scenarios, I'm going to go ahead and ask for the read and write scope, which is WL.SkyDrive update. And so let's go ahead and launch the app again. And so, there's one more thing I wanted to show. Can also specify a type to show slightly different text. I want to show connect instead of the word sign in. And so I'm going to specify that. You can also customize it with your own text. The advantage of using ours is that it's localized into a whole bunch of languages, and so you can just tap into that. And so now you can see that the button has changed. It's got the SkyDrive logo, and it's got the words connect. In your app, you very likely would want to put some additional terminology around what's happening and why the user should click the button and kind of guide them through the flow. But I'm going to go ahead and click it. Now you can see that we're asking for two things: sign you in automatically, and also access and update and modify your SkyDrive. We're going to go ahead and say yes. And so from now, the button changed. We're now signed in. And so let's go back to the editor, and what I'm going to do is add an API call. I'm going to add a button, add an onClick handler that invokes a new API method that I'm about to define. And what we're just going to do quickly is to make a call and get the number of items in the user's root folder of SkyDrive. So I'm going to say get count. So from here, I'm going to go back to this file, and I'm just going to add a function API. And then from here, I'm just going to use the WL object again, make an API call. This takes in an object with properties and a callback. And so I'm going to go ahead and do that. And so what we want to do here is we just want to do a get on the particular path, which is me/SkyDrive. You can read the docs to see all about the other paths we support to get contacts, calendars, whatnot. And so once we get the response, we're going to make sure that it's not an error. And then we're just going to go update the count to be what we got back from the cloud. So I had forgotten to define a div here. So that should be it. So as you can see, because I'd previously granted consent, launched the app this time, the app now knows who I am. So I'm going to go ahead and click get count. And then from there, it should return the number of items. And as you can see, it returned 9. And so I'll show you later as we get deeper, but that this does match the number of entries that I have in my SkyDrive. But as you can see, it's actually really easy to get your app up and running and get it going with SkyDrive access. So what did we just see? We saw that it's super easy to go and provision your app to work with the cloud. It's also really easy to get the live SDK and get it installed and referencing it. And then lastly, in order to get your app up and running, using the JavaScript library, very few lines of code, should be super intuitive and easy for you to leverage. And so from there, these are the kind of the broad set of scenarios I can show you. The first one I can show you is kind of the most interesting one, gets things going. It's really just being able to navigate the file system, be able to show you how to view photos, play audio, play video, even embed Office documents into your app, how to download, upload, and even share links to content. And so does anyone have any questions at this point? You in the front?
If you have multiple developers, how do they share access to that store where you registered that? Isn't that for Live ID?
So the question was, I've got multiple developers. How do we share access to the store and the account information? Our recommendation is at this time is to create an account that your team or your company shares, and you just manage that accordingly, and only have kind of a one-to-one mapping between Live ID and the applications you create either within Live or subsequently in the Windows Store. Any others? Okay, let's go ahead and switch back. Or was there one? Sure, sorry.
In the keynote, you demonstrated you had a provider for getting to a remote PC through SkyDrive. Will this API work for that as well, or is it purely for the cloud storage?
So the question was, I saw during the keynote a way to tunnel from one machine to the content on another machine, and asking whether that is available in these APIs. The answer is no. Unfortunately, that isn't supported today. Any other questions? Okay. What I'm going to do now is just open a new project that kind of gets us to a little bit further along. There's some CSS that's been specified and whatnot that I don't want to bore you with right now. This app is built using one of the built-in templates within the experience, this split application template. This template happened to just be kind of a good candidate for what I'm going to show you. It's good for kind of hierarchical data where you want to drill down. And so because I want to show you folder hierarchies and be able to show you the corresponding file content, this is a good candidate for that. And so this is what was used to get up and running. And so from here, I'll go ahead and just show you that there's no magic. You'll see that this app looks and feels a lot like the thing we just put together. I've added some text to help the user understand what's happening, and we've got the button that I just added. So the one thing to note about this is, it's obviously well and good that you need to get consent. You want to show a special kind of flow the first time the user goes through. You might ask, okay, how can I do that so that, like, if the user's already connected, they don't even see this experience at all, and they literally jump into my app's content? I'm going to show you how that can be done. And so to do that, I'm going to go ahead in the main script file, default.js, that got added. And you can see here, all that I'm doing right now is you've got the corresponding wl.init call that I showed earlier, but then separately I'm specifying startpage.html, and that's the page that we initially navigate to. And so this is the page you just saw. I'm going to go ahead and replace this code with a little bit different. And so what you see here is we're leveraging another intrinsic function within the JavaScript library. It's this getLogin status. This lets you know kind of initially, hey, do I have a connection with this user or not? And as you can see here, we're just taking advantage of that in a pretty straightforward way and saying, hey, if the user doesn't have a connection, let's go to the start page. Otherwise, let's take them to the viewer page. And so otherwise, everything's the same. And then there's one other change that we need to make, which is actually to the start page, which is in the case that the user is going through the flow the first time, we actually, via the start page, need to tell the app to go on to the viewer page. And so the way that we end up accomplishing this is by subscribing to an event within the JavaScript library. This is the auth.login event, and we're attaching a function to that, and I'm going to go ahead and add that here. And so, again, this is pretty consistent with what I just showed you. If we get that event and we're connected, we go ahead and unsubscribe ourselves just to be able to clean up memory and whatnot, and then from there we navigate to the viewer page. And so I can go ahead and show that. Now, the one thing to note here as I go through this, you'll see that sometimes I'll automatically go to the SkyDrive, the viewing page, and sometimes I'm going to see this experience. Unfortunately, there's a bug in our service that is causing this. We should have it fixed next week, so it will be 100% consistent, and you'll always kind of be connected outright whenever you launch your app. And so I'm going to go ahead and connect. And this takes me to the viewer page. There's nothing here yet. So what I'm about to show you will be the code to actually display files. And so what we need to do is we're going to go into the viewer page. And the viewer page is taking advantage of one of the built-in Win.js collection controls, specifically the list view. And so it just binds some array of information to UI. And so we're just leveraging that. And so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add in a little bit of code. And then, so fragment load is the function that gets called kind of automatically. You've probably seen it if you've played with the templates. It gets loaded when this viewer page.html gets loaded. We're going to go ahead and, in this case, invoke refresh path, which is a function I just added. What this does is basically take some information that may have gotten passed in as options to the fragment and leverages it. And so in cases where we have options, we end up using the name and path. The name is the name of the folder we're going to show. Absent that information, we just default to SkyDrive for the string, and then we default to the me SkyDrive path that I was showing you earlier. The reason we're doing this is we're actually just taking advantage of the built-in navigation structure of the controls. And so as I recurse deeper into the user's SkyDrive folders, we're just ultimately instantiating new instances of the viewer page.html and passing it the name of the folder we want to render and its corresponding ID. And so that's what we're doing here. And then separately, we added in a small function to tell whether a given file object is something that we want to treat as a folder. SkyDrive has support for, obviously, folders, but also a concept that we call albums. Albums tend to be kind of, filled with photos and videos, and if you go into the SkyDrive experience, there's built-in support for users to arrange the photos in a particular order, and so albums are like folders, but slightly different. And then from there, this is the kind of the meat of the call to actually fetch a given folder contents paths. First thing we do is just update the title. It's not very, very interesting. We're just taking the name and putting it somewhere in the markup. And then separately, the viewer region where we're going to show detailed file content, we're just clearing that out. And then from here, we're taking advantage of the WL API call. We default to making a call to me/SkyDrive/files. This returns JSON that includes an array of all the content within in the root folder. And so in cases of an error, we return a bunch of information about what went wrong. I obviously encourage you all to handle that properly in your applications rather than taking the easy way out like I did here. And then from there, we get back the data. And so this is just an array of file objects. In order to work with the list view control I was talking about earlier, we end up having to kind of massage the data a little bit into a format that it expects. And so we default to a particular group, which is a concept within that control. And then for the keys of the items, we happen to use the item ID. And then we separately just stash the files directly into a file property that we'll use for our purposes. And then lastly, we just do a step here where we end up sorting the content that we get back, and we end up sorting it based on the user's locale preferences. And so it's a little more complicated because I've wanted the folders to show up at top, and then any files that sit alongside those to show below. And so this code handles that. And then from there, we go ahead and assign the items to a local object we use for our purposes, and then we call update list, which just is responsible for refreshing the binding between the list view control and the corresponding data. And so we should be able to give this a try, and with any luck, we'll be able to see the root folders within my SkyDrive. And so, as you can see, there should be 9 items in here. So I wasn't fibbing earlier, and they're sorted by file name with a specific text file at the bottom. And so you can see that. And so the next step I'm going to do is add in the little bit of code needed to recurse deeper. And so what that will let me do is if I click on a birthday, I'll be able to drill in deeper and go to the birthday folder and see the files in there. And so as part of the template, there's a built-in item invoked call. This is registered automatically, and this is invoked whenever the user clicks or touches on one of the objects in the list view. And so I'm going to go ahead and add some code here. And so from here, we're going to go ahead and call this display item. And so we're passing in the file object that corresponds to the item in the list view. And so in here, what we do is we essentially grab hold of the viewer region that we're going to use later to show file content. And then specifically, if we've got a folder, we're going to invoke this new display folder function that I just added. Now, all this function does is it's pretty straightforward. We're navigating to a new instance of the viewer page, which is the page we're running right now. And we populate it with the file name, which is the folder's name, and the file ID, which is the ID that we'll use to fetch that folder's contents. And so that's pretty much it. And so when I run this, you should be able to see pretty easily what it took to kind of traverse the folder structure. So if I click Documents, we're going to go ahead and load that folder's files. And you see a collection of Word and PowerPoint and Excel docs. I can click Birthday Party. Same thing. Bunch of folders. You can even see one of the files in there had an associated description in the cloud. We're showing that here. So how was that binding working? In the viewer page, we've got some markup in it, which handles this. And this takes advantage of some of the Win.js binding functionality. The relevant portions are over right here, what I've highlighted. We're taking the file name and we're throwing it in a div, and then we're taking the file description and doing the same. Next step, what I'm about to show you is we're going to show some of the details about file contents. And so again, we've got another template here to assist with that. And we're just showing kind of a grab bag of properties that get returned for files. And so you've got the name, you've got the description, you've got when it was created, and in its file size. And so we're going to go ahead and hook that up. So in here, all this is doing is it's essentially grabbing that file template and the corresponding Win.js control and invoking its render method. What this does is take the file object we give it and maps the data to the markup. And so there's just one other small change we need to make, which is in cases where we're not dealing with a folder, we're going to go ahead and display the file. Let's give that a try. So let's go ahead and drill into the birthday party. Let's click a random one. And so as you can see there, we're showing some metadata about that file. You've got the name, when it was added, even how big it is. This obviously is somewhat interesting, but doesn't feel very, Metro style. And so what I can show you now is what we're going to do is if we're dealing with a photo type, we're going to actually just render the photo. And so there's not a lot of magic there. And so just adding in a couple functions. One is just to say, hey, is this the photo? And we can infer that based on the type of the object. And then from there, we're just displaying the photo in the markup. You might ask, hey, why is he not just using an image tag? I happen to be taking advantage of some new CSS3 functionality that by assigning the image to a background, I can actually have it fit the space. And so I end up having to not do a bunch of math by hand to resize the image into the region I want to use. And so in here, I just have to add a little bit of code to say, is this photo a file? And then from there, we should be good. And so as you can see, we're able to display the photos that we got from SkyDrive On Demand. And so from here, got kind of a number of options. Is there anything in the list of things that people really want to see right now? Or anyone have any new questions they want to ask? Office docs? Okay. Anything else after that? Yes. Okay, I'll show that next. So the one thing to note about the Office docs, we do have one limitation today, which is they've got to be public docs. And so what that means is it's got to be one that you've made generally available via the web. It's a limitation that exists. And so the documents in my particular SkyDrive I've went in previously and configured the folder to be public. And so that's the one caveat with that. But I can otherwise show that. Right now, so let me repeat the question. The question was, will the behavior around the public behavior of displaying the Office docs change before RTM? The answer is most likely not. Right now, in terms of where we're at, while we did release a developer preview of the Live SDK and the new SkyDrive and calendar functionality, we're really at the near the end of the funnel in terms of getting that to ship quality, and we're really just right now focused on primarily ironing out functional bugs, and then from there we're going to release it very soon. And so any new features like that or anything else people might suggest will most likely just come in the next or future iterations. I would say that's a fair possibility. So I added in a little bit of code. There's a couple things to note about this. In order to get the markup to actually embed one of these Office docs, you actually have to just make a separate call to the service. As you can see here, we ask for the file ID /embed, and what this will return is some JSON with a property called embed HTML. Given the pre-release nature of this functionality, there currently is a bug in the markup we give back, and so I have a magic function here that I won't show you what it does to fix that bug, but we're going to fix that in the coming weeks as we rev new bits. The other thing you'll note that might be a bit surprising to you if you've done web development before, all we're doing is taking some of the HTML we got back from the cloud and shoving it in the inner HTML property of a DOM element. The JavaScript engine that's used by the Metro style apps actually prevents a bunch of what it considers unsafe behavior by default. And so there's a lot of quirks in JavaScript and in the browser engine in terms of getting code execution to occur in cases where users don't expect. And so just as a preventative measure, make people be conscious about what they're doing, you actually have to wrap any inner HTML assignments, and there's a list of probably 10 or other actions that you need to wrap inside of this mswwa.exec unsafe local function. By doing that, you're essentially saying, hey, I trust what I'm about to do. Let me do this. I know that I'm doing something that's risky. Because we're returning safe markup, we're going to go ahead and just go ahead and assign that. The other thing we need to do now is go ahead and process this differently. The way that we're going to do that, there's actually a property that we return on file objects. It's called is_embeddable. What that does is indicate to you, the developer, that you can, in fact, make embed calls for that file content. And so I'm going to go ahead and do that. We'll give it a try. And so I'm going to navigate to the Documents folder. As I mentioned earlier, the Documents folder is publicly available for this specific account. And so I'm going to go ahead and try clicking on one of these PowerPoints. Oh. Oops. Yeah. Let's try that again. And so as you can see right there, we've got a PowerPoint embedded in our JavaScript app. And it works. I can click around. Let's go ahead and try this Excel file. And so as you can see here, I've got an Excel doc, and I've embedded it in my app. So there's a question, are these editable if you have write access? The answer is, I want to say no. These are, if you're familiar with, going on SkyDrive today or the Office site, you can create these. And I believe the answer is no. They do let you potentially play with the data. I think I could actually go in and change some of it, and the calculations would reflect in, say, the graph, but there isn't a way to push this back up to the cloud.
If I wanted to get a link where you have a button that says edit this, and then it would take SkyDrive API or whatever it takes.
Okay, and so the question was, is there a way to get a link to this content in SkyDrive such that it's editable? The answer is yes, and I can show how to do that in a little bit. So the next thing I'll show is someone in the audience wanted to see video in action. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So this should come as no surprise. It's equally simple. If the type is video, we've got a video. And then from there, what we're doing is we're just leveraging an HTML5 video tag. We're configuring it. We're specifying that we want the controls to show up. We also want this thing to preload and get downloading because we want it to be able to play right when we actually add it to the DOM. We're taking advantage of the poster attribute. This lets you display kind of a thumbnail before the video has loaded. And then lastly, we assign the source to the source attribute. And just need to add a little bit of code here to handle that. So the one thing to note about this is the sample video files that we have to use for these presentations are pretty beefy, and so in terms of the streaming experience, I've had it be kind of hit or miss over the last few days. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the videos folder, and I've clicked Bing.mp4. And it's loading a Bing commercial that you may or may not have seen. As you can see, it's only loaded partially. Let me go ahead and play that, but it may end up pausing when it hits that spot. And so
Juan Carlos.
Isabela, yo tengo Bing.
Bing.
Ven otra vez.
Price Predictor dice que es buen momento para volar.
Adiós, Juan Carlos.
No, por favor. No, los leds.
Stop searching, start deciding with Bing, the decision engine from Microsoft.
So there you have it. It's very straightforward to get video playing in your app. Audio is very similar. You end up just using the audio tag that's part of HTML5, and it plays in a very similar fashion. Got a question up front?
Yeah, so how is this SDK
The question was, hey, I'm using XAML. Is it possible to do what you just showed? Some of these scenarios that I showed kind of are conducive to the browser, like the displaying the document one. That won't work as easily in the XAML-based thing. But for video and audio, you should be able to hook up the stream to your your control and display it. So that should work. So the question was relating to the where's the content coming from, and do we do anything special to make sure the content is near the user? We do that to some extent within Windows Live. We try to move the content as close to the user as possible, given the locations of our data centers. It's not kind of an explicit goal here to do anything like deploying this to say like a CDN so people around the world can get an optimal viewing experience. This really is the user's content, and so we don't make kind of extraordinary effort to bring it to a CDN for those purposes. So the question was, if I'm in Europe, do I get a great or a crummy experience? I would say that we do things to make sure that users globally get a great experience. There's another question a little bit further back.
Yeah, I was just wondering the order that you put is photo, is video, and then file that is embeddable. Is photo and video, are they embeddable? Is that why you have it in that order, or just that's the order that you did it?
Okay, so the question was, hey, why did you put is embeddable near the bottom of the if-else chain? The answer was these today are kind of mutually exclusive in the sense that the Office docs are the ones that primarily they return is embeddable. So the ordering here doesn't matter. In the future, we may change this in subsequent versions of the API, but we would be conscious of that and let you know if we were altering that behavior in any way. Question way in the back.
Does this only work with Metro-style apps, or can you use the API with legacy apps?
So the question was, does this work with just Metro-style apps, or can you use the API in legacy apps? The answer is, as I mentioned earlier, we have libraries specifically for the web, Metro-style apps, and Windows Phone. That being said, we're just using OAuth. We're just using kind of a simple JSON-based REST interface, and so it should be. You can go build an iOS app. You can build an Android app. You could build a WPF desktop app. All of that works. It does mean though that you're going to have to a little more legwork on your part. We do have a GitHub repository with a bunch of samples for all of those platforms. So if you were trying to build a WPF app, we've got a sample that will probably really get you kind of going pretty quickly and get you consent and get you making API calls. And so if you're targeting one of those platforms, definitely check that out. Separately though, we are constantly looking and listening to people's feedback, and so if there's a platform that you think it's really important for us to be there, give us that feedback. Come on our forums, let us know, and we really will take that to heart as we figure out where we're going to go next. One more question?
So you can access still the mesh synchronized SkyDrive folders?
So the question was, can I access the mesh synchronized folders? The answer is no. The information that you're able to get to via these APIs is exactly what you would see if you navigated to your account on skydrive.com and poked around. And so that's what's accessible today. If there's no more questions right now, I'll jump back and demonstrate the scenario about taking sharing a link to content for the editing purposes. And so what we need to do there is going to go ahead and take advantage of the app bar in this Metro style app. And so if you went to Jensen's talk on the first day, he talked about how if you've got things that are important but not quite important to put prominently in the Chrome, you should take advantage of the app bar, which is accessible either via Windows key or swiping. So I'm going to go ahead and add a button there specifically for this sharing scenario. So I've got a little bit of code I need to add just for working with the app bar. It's all pretty basic. A little function for actually getting the corresponding control from the DOM element. Separately, a little function for actually hiding the app bar. And then lastly, one for clearing all of the things from the app bar. And so some of the other options that I could demo, like upload, download, delete, etc., would be hidden as well. And so from there, I'm going to go ahead and add the code to show the sharing scenario. The one thing to note, we kind of have two key functions here. One is the code for actually displaying the button and hooking up the wiring so that when the user clicks the button, the right things happen. And so right here you can see if we've got a file and it's not a folder, we're going to go ahead and show the share button on the app bar. And then separately, we're going to take that button and we're going to attach an on-click handler. All that on-click handler will do will hide the app bar and then proceed to the next function, which is to share the file.
Actually should be checking not as folder and not as album.
So is folder, if you recall, does both. Right there.
Oh,
But
I see.
so yeah. And so from here, let's assume that let me just quickly show you the markup. So if you've created one of these apps, you'll probably, oops, wrong one. If you've created one of these apps and you kind of jump into the markup, there's this existing app bar section with a home button. I went ahead and kind of added a bunch of the others for our scenarios. The one we're interested in right now is the share. In terms of the icon we show, I literally just went spelunking in the character map and looked around the home button and found a bunch of others that are relevant for these scenarios. And I'm just using one that kind of makes sense for what we're trying to do. And so in here, we're actually taking advantage of some of the WinRT capabilities. Specifically, we're just going to show a dialog, and so this is a pop-up that's built into WinRT, and we're specifically asking the user, hey, do you want to share this file? And they're given a choice. If they say yes, we proceed and go ahead and execute some code. And so to actually do what we're trying to accomplish, right here, this code will get a read-only version of the file content. But it is also possible to ask for the shared edit link as well, and that will be an editable document. When you do this action on behalf of the user, what ends up happening in their SkyDrive experience, if they go back to the SkyDrive web-based UI and they click on the file, it'll actually prominently show, hey, I've shared an edit or a read link with this particular app, and they can obviously revoke that at any time in the future. But in terms of what we're going to do with it, we're literally taking the link that we got back, and we're wrapping it in the WinRT URI object. And then from there, we're just here launching, using the launcher object to launch the default program for a link. And so this will just open the Metro-style app version of Internet Explorer. Obviously, your scenarios may be completely different. You may want to share via email or through some other means within your pre-existing experience. And so all I've done here is kind of shoot you to the Internet Explorer experience to show that the scenario is actually working. The last step here to get it going is I actually need to just display the button at the appropriate time. And so we're going to do that right here. So I'm going to go ahead and pick a song in here in my music. And now as you can see, the code I'd wired up, we've got a little share button at the bottom in the app bar. So I'm going to go ahead and click that. And so as you can see, this is the prompt that I wired up. And so we're just asking the user, are you sure you want to share this? If we were being a little more helpful, we probably would say, hey, like if you want to turn this off later, go back to SkyDrive to do that. And so let's go ahead and give this a try. And so there you have it. As you can see, we were launched into a special SkyDrive viewing experience. And so if this thing were shared around, this specific file that I shared would be accessible via the link that we generated.
So when you say share this contact, is that referring to the permissions on the music folder?
No, so it's actually a specific item within the folder. And so the item that the API that I invoked was on the path of item ID, which was this song slash shared view link. It's shared via the link itself. So the link has a key attached to it that is kind of the way in to display it. And so if I were instead to share an Office doc, a Word document, and it were the edit version, and I gave it to you, you would be able to go in and party on the doc and change it and do whatever you wanted. So at this point, we've got a few minutes left. Any more questions? Yes.
Yeah, for the Windows Phone API, is that something that if you're using Bang or apps and
So with the Live SDK as a whole right now is developer preview. And this largely is just a function of the fact that the back-end APIs we're actually using our beta environment. And so right now, you cannot use the SkyDrive functionality, the new calendar functionality in a live app. But once we just iron out the remaining bugs and whatnot in the coming month or so, we'll rev that, and you'll be able to at that point go and ship a phone app right away. Obviously, the Windows developer preview stuff is a different story, and we're gonna keep in sync with that over the coming milestones of its release schedule. You. So the question is, hey, I saw during Dare's talk that he signed into Live with a Gmail account. The answer is any verifiable email address is supported. And so what that actually means is you actually have to go through a kind of a confirmation process. And so, if you go hook up, if you create a brand new Hotmail account, it works out of the box. If you use a Gmail account, a mail gets sent to you with a link, and you have to click on that. And at that point, we know, hey, you actually control the account. And so, does that answer your question? Okay. So the question was, hey, you're using JavaScript. Why aren't you using C++ or C#? I personally like JavaScript, and it's kind of fun for kind of hacking and throwing together this stuff. All of this stuff this app, all of this, I literally threw together in like a day and a half. And so I happen to like it for that purpose. But if you do C# and XAML and all of that, like we support you, and we've got identical functionality for you in that environment. Any other questions? Oh, sorry.
Can you mount the SkyDrive as a traditional Windows Mac drive, something like that, see in Explorer?
So the question was, can you mount the SkyDrive as a folder? The answer is no. You can't. You can, if you saw during the live portion of the demos, there will be a way for you to view the SkyDrive via one of the live apps. And then separately, you can go to the web experience, or hopefully, use an app that someone in this room goes and builds in the coming weeks. One more question up front.
Can the application know that if there is any change in the SkyDrive?
So the question is, can an app know that a change has happened in SkyDrive? There's a couple ways an app can do that. We don't currently support some form of notifications, but by either inspecting the file or folder timestamps, or taking advantage of optimistic concurrency of HTTP, you should be able to find out whether content has changed. And so at this point we're over time, so come on up afterward, and I'll do everything I can to answer your questions and help you out. Thank you.